Okay, so now let's move from land to the water. So I put the aquatic and the marine biomes all in one lecture. So let's jump in. Now, I want you to appreciate these biomes are super diverse and they are really influenced by the abiotic factors. You're going to see a lot of light and temperature and how it flows that's really going to influence how it's organized, especially when it comes to the oceans. Now, with water, it's going to have a lot of different physical properties than air. And when it comes to that, only so much water can actually get through water. We're going to see when we get to, especially talking about the oceans, we get to a depth where sunlight cannot reach. And when that happens, we're going to see the organisms, especially those that depend on photosynthesis, can't live in that area. So then when you get to the super deep dark parts of the ocean, these are organisms that are primarily decomposers or feed on other organisms. They're not going to be able to, you're not going to see a lot of plants in that area, and it's mostly going to be predators in that range. Now, thanks to solar radiation, this is where we're going to see those distinct layers, and then that's going to affect the oxygen levels too, because you're going to see more oxygen available in the areas where plants are able to grow and those photosynthetic organisms compared to ones later on. It's just something they call stratification. Now, the water does move, especially when I talk about the climate change, you'll see currents and tides, so it moves temperature throughout the different areas. And then you're going to see, depending on type of water, you're going to have different kinds of solids or salts dissolved within it. Now, the ocean is kind of divided into different zones. When we talk about the marine biomes, we have the oceans, coral reefs, and estuaries. And we'll break the oceans up into zones based on depth first. So we have what's called the pelagorenic realm, which is just pretty much anything that's open water, based off this graph right here. Now, then we're going to break it up into some smaller realms there. So the benthic realm is from the surface to the deepest part of the ocean floor. This is where you're going to have, including all of this right here, you're going to have the sand, silt, and dead organisms. Now, after that, we break it up into smaller zones. So here's your benthic realm. I might be saying that wrong. I'm sorry. We break it up into zones. The top zone is called the photic zone. This is the surface to the limit where photosynthesis can occur. So any plant life or photosynthetic organisms are going to be around here, and it goes through about 650 feet. The aphotic zone, it's getting a little bit light. It's where light can no longer penetrate. And the lowest part's the abysmal zone. This is the deepest part. It's going to be very cold and have a lot of pressure. The deepest part that we've measured with the Challenger is gone to the Mariana Trench in the Pacific Ocean, about 6.8 miles deep, an average depth 14,000 feet. Quite fascinating. I love to watch shows that go and like show organisms down here because they're actually quite fascinating and be quite scary, like stuff you see in nightmares. Now, if you base it off on distance from land, there's different ways you can classify it too. So depth was one way. Let's do it based off land. So the first is the intertidal zone. This is the one closest to land, very, very low shore. This is going to alternate between the low and high tides. I always think of the tide pools that you can see, and it can vary. It can be sandy, rocky, muddy, tangled with mangroves, and it has to be one that can withstand damage from the pounding waves. I do love going to the beach. I miss that I wasn't able to, I got to go once this summer, but I do love the ocean. Now the next is the neritic zone, might be saying that, netric zone. And this is where the margin from the intertidal to the edge of the intertidal zone, right here. Okay, sorry if I'm reading this wrong on other stuff, I might have typed it wrong there. Now this is where you're going to find the highest productivity and biodiversity in the ocean. A lot of life is going to happen right here. This is where you'll probably find like all your coral reefs in this area. You're going to have it be well oxygenated, low in water pressure, and very stable. So a lot of life happens right here. Think Finding Nemo. And then finally have the oceanic zone, which is the ocean. And then this is where we start to see that thermal stratification happen. So let's talk a little bit more about our other ones. So we have the coral reefs. And these are formed by those marine invertebrates living in the shallow of the photic zone. Now, the corals, they have calcium carbonate in their skeleton forming the reefs, and these guys are so important. And It's really scary. You're going to watch a video, I think 2 short ones on coral bleaching, and it's really sad because this is actually one of the most diverse biomes out there, because it's not just a coral that lives there, but 4,000 species of fish thrive in there, and then there's all the mammals that feed off those fish. It is a huge food web, and these coral are down at the bottom. And these corals being threatened by pollution and rising ocean temperature, they actually can only thrive in a certain temperature. And it's when the temperature is increasing, it's causing them to lose their photosynthetic pigments, and that's what's causing the bleaching. Now, there are different impacts. We have been seeing the coral reefs decline, and sometimes they do this weird thing where they have this really bright flash before they go out. It's kind of interesting. We have seen where overfishing has led to decrease of some of the animals in there. Sea urchins is really bad. Um, but also, the latest one I heard was sunscreen. So, you know, in some areas like Hawaii, they will not let you use certain sunscreens there because it has been shown to influence the reefs. So the next aquatic biome is the estuaries. This is where the ocean meets the fresh water. So you'll hear the term brackish before, and this is where we have a mixture, the fresh and the salt water. Now it does rely heavily on tides, but these animals really thrive in this area because it provides a safe environment. You'll see this is really as a breeding ground for a lot of crustaceans and mollusks and fish in these kind of areas. Now your lakes and ponds are grouped together, so these are your freshwater biomes, and we'll talk about streams and wetlands on the next slide. So we get a lot of ecosystem benefits from this because this is where we get our drinking water, use the water for crop irrigation, and runs our sanitation systems. Now temperature is going to play a key role to how the life in the lake and ponds gets, because remember, stratification happens. So light can only go so far and temperature will only go so far either. So the warmer layers are going to be on top, and that's probably where you're going to find most of the life. When you get to those cooler temperatures, it's going to cause the layers to mix a little bit, but then we're not going to see as much activity. Now, this is where we have a problem with, is where we have excess nitrogen and phosphorus runoff, where we can actually go through and cause a eutrophication that I talked about in the previous level. It's where we get these algae blooms. And what that happens is it cuts off all the light getting to the lower levels. And if that cuts off photosynthesis, then anything below that winds up dying. And then we have the depletion of oxygen, and we have massive fish die-offs. So your rivers and streams, this might be one of those ecosystems that you go out and document for the project. So these are continuously moving. I love to go down to the Trinity River, and I love how it has it to where you can actually go down and actually get close to the river. Now these are going to be eventually empty into a lake or ocean, and they do have a source of water, the point of origin, and it's going to be very cold, low in nutrients when it first comes out. Now some words that come out about talking about rivers and streams. You have the channel, which is just pretty much the width of the river or stream. You have the headwater, which is the very beginning, and this is going to be a lot more quick in movement compared to later on. And the type of organisms that survive in the different areas depends how they can adapt to that environment. Now, as it goes further away from the source, you're going to see the channel widen and the current slow. So the further it gets away from the source, the slower and wider the river is going to get. And then you'll see different types of organisms that thrive in those areas. And eventually, as it gets to the ocean, you're going to see any silt that will settle out. So this is where you see it in all the deltas. And finally, the last one they talk about in this section is the wetlands. So this is where the soil is either permanently or periodically saturated with water. And I always think of Florida for this one reason right here, where you find all the alligators. Now you are going to have their vegetation, it's going to be rooted in soil, but parts of it are actually going to be above the water surface. So a lot of mangroves and these trees that really thrive in there. Now this will include your marshes, where the marshes can be both fresh and salt water, your swamps, your bogs, and your mud flaps. Now depending on the flow of water, determine if it's a swamp or a marsh, or swamp, marsh, or a bog. And with these, sometimes they have stagnant water, and that can deplete the ocean, or the oxygen, sorry, in the pH levels. And you'll see some of the weirdest plants thrive in these areas. Go back and watch one of those plant videos, because this is where you're going to find some of those odd ones. So once again, here's some review videos and credits for the images.